Taste Tomorrow este la a treia ediție în care facem evenimentul. Taste Tomorrow, în schimb, se întâmplă din 2012, este la a cincea ediție a studiului, este deja depășit sfera de cercetare de piață, pentru că ce am reușit să facem cu acest studiu Taste Tomorrow este să creăm un întreg ecosistem în care am depășit chiar și metodologiile standard de colectare a informațiilor de la consumatori, am depășit zona de focus grupuri, de discuții cu experții, le avem, le păstrăm în continuare, facem și validare cu consumatorul, însă dinamismul din piață ne impune să ne adaptăm și să venim cu alte metodologii de a fi în permanentă conectare cu ce se întâmplă în mintea consumatorului. Și pentru a exemplifica ce înseamnă pentru noi metodologia de colectare și de identificare a semnalelor de tendințe emergente în industria noastră, o să-l invit alături de mine pe scenă și o să prezentăm împreună studiul 2023-2024 Taste Tomorrow, pe cel care coordonează acest studiu la nivel global, în 50 de țări, în care desfășurăm sincron acest studiu. Nanno Palte, Group Marketing Intelligence Laboratus Group. Nanno, please join me.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a nice introduction.
The floor is lava, and I will sit right here.
All good. Very nice to be here with all of you, such a vibrant community, lots of people. I would like to kick off my presentation with a short personal story. I bought this smart speaker 2 years ago for our kitchen. I don't know, anyone in the room who has a smart speaker at home like this? A few, okay. Well, our initial idea when we bought this one was we wanted to listen to the breaking news in the morning and listen to some nice music in the evening. But it actually turned out that the usage of this smart speaker became very quickly quite different than what we expected. As soon as the kids find out that they could ask questions to Google, and they could ask to Google if it was true what the parents said, that the multigrain bread in the morning was more healthy than the white loaf of bread, and I'm sure that some parents will recognize this kind of discussions. We quickly realized that with the use of social media, with the use of search, everything changes. The way we live, the way we work, and as such, that's not a surprise. If we see that we have almost 4.8 billion people who are social media users, it's almost 60% of the global population, right? It's huge. And it's not occasional usage. It's people who spend almost 2.5 hours a day, shows a survey, on social media. So I'm wondering when they're working, but still it's a massive amount. Now imagine what if you could be a fly on the wall of these kitchens. If you could follow these kind of discussions that parents have with their children on bread, on pastry. Imagine if you could listen in your language, but even beyond, in 8 different languages worldwide. And if you could filter out this information, right? So you would have, of course, that's what we started to do at Puratos 3 years ago, and this is the result, right? You get a gold mine, you get a mass of information, and then of course your first reaction is, well, Houston, we have a problem here, we have so many data, and we need to dig to the gold, right? How do we filter, how do we get to the great insights? Well, first of all, we started to filter information, right? Because we only wanted to listen to conversations that are relevant for us in the area of bread, patisserie, and chocolate. We don't want noise when people start to talk about cake day when they are in cryptocurrencies, for instance. So you really need to clean that out. But even if you clean that out, we still on average pull 180,000 conversations, data points on a daily basis in 8 different languages. So we thought we needed a little bit more, and that's why we started to develop this underlying trend work. So we're not inventing the trends, we're really putting in place a process that you can see here. First, we listen to all these conversations. That's what we call the trend signals. So we see people are talking about flaky sourdough croissants, for instance. And we see other conversations, and they group together in what we then call a trend around sourdough. Sourdough, most of you will be familiar with it. It has known an enormous hype after COVID, when people started to home bake, when yeast was out of stock, and it really gets, I would say, to almost a second level. But sourdough then as such, as a trend, fits into something bigger that we call footsteps. So basically the way we build is from a micro, meso to a macro level. And actually these footsteps are then what helps us to put structure in everything. Now this is a lot of information. It's a very bad slide if you present this during a presentation. But the idea here is to showcase a little bit the wealth and the richness of the information that we have. We see approximately 24 trends here that we are following, and these trends come and go over time. But what is more or less stable is in the middle, the footsteps. We have 8 of them, and for instance, if we take the example of baked goods, that's all about taste, freshness, and health. These are elements we had 10 years ago, and I bet my money on it that within 10 years we will still be talking about taste, about health, and consumers trading off the two whenever they buy a bread or a patisserie item. And freshness is also something that still plays a big role. Craftsmanship, for instance, is another footstep that is very important. But it starts to be challenged to some extent with convenience, right? We all have now our applications and we expect to be delivered, well, ideally the next day, and if possible, still the same day. So our artisans, our craftsmen need to battle with the convenience of the new store formats, such as the bakery chains and the convenience stores. So that's a dynamic that we see going on. Conscious consumption is another footstep we have already been talking about a little bit in the beginning. Sustainability is becoming more and more important. Consumers talk a lot about sustainable packaging, talk about upcycling. Plant-based, for instance, is also, on the one hand, fed by the concerns of sustainability, but of course also from health concerns. So that's a bit how we structure it. And then how do we play with this? Well, actually, you can do this in different ways, right? You can start to look at the volume. So this is a global picture. And here you see, for instance, plant-based still tracks a huge volume. On the horizontal axis, you see the volume. On the vertical axis, you see the velocity. Also interesting to look at what we see top left, because for the moment, they are not that huge. But this could be emerging, this could be relevant and become more important for today and the day after. And then you see on the right-hand side, plant-based, tangy twist, freshness on demand. All of these trends trigger a lot of volume globally with consumers. Now, of course, you would say the global consumer doesn't exist, and you're right. If we talk about tangy twists, it's about these new, unconventional, more sour tastes. And in Europe, for instance, consumers will talk about lemon, but in Japan, consumers will talk about yuzu. And in Brazil, for instance, it will be more around citrus type of tastes. So it's very important to look at all these trends in a way that we can put on, I would say, regional lenses. So this is the global picture. And then, of course, it's interesting to have a look at, okay, what do we see happening across different regions? And then you see, for instance, growing trends in terms of mental well-being or gut health. These are strongly growing in Europe. But we see them much less present, for instance, in APAC and in the Americas. So here the idea was to showcase you a little bit, of course, that the global picture as such doesn't exist, and that we need regional lenses, because, yeah, the average consumer, it's difficult to bet your money on the average consumer. We still need to take into consideration what is happening regionally. And what you would have seen in the slides, for instance, is that you see mental well-being, gut health. These are emerging trends that are quite strong in Europe. But for instance, if you would look at the US or if you would look at APAC, it would be much more about emerging trends around tech-inspired, for instance. They are different, and at the same time, both are interesting. When we look at social, it's very interesting because it gives us the ability to look at what is emerging. What is also interesting with social is that you can look at pictures, you can look at videos, so you really have this sensorial delight that you see translated. Whereas if you go to look at what Google is learning us, if you look at search data, you don't have all these visual stimuli, but you have true intentions of consumers. And that's also interesting because you know what they are looking for, you understand in what languages, in what terms they are looking for new ingredients, new recipes, etc. So we actually think that it's by mingling search and social that we get the best of both worlds when we look at what we tend to call qualitative big data. I've already been presenting this a little bit, right? I was talking to you about social and search and why the two are interesting to mingle together. And that's why we not only look at conversations, but we also look at search in order really to build an inspiring trend work. Now, last but not least, because I'm still, as you can see, some gray hair is popping up, I'm still a traditional researcher as well. So I really like the big data, but I also like representative samples, right? And this is what we have been doing for 10 years in a row now. We are interviewing more than 20,000 consumers globally in 50 countries, and we can measure how things are evolving over time. So these are really, I would say, samples that are important. And why is this so important? Because on the one hand, we won't like to give you, I lost my, yeah. This is a good test, and this presentation, visual, voice, but you still hear me, right? Sorry. So this is actually why we want to validate the trends and the things, how they are moving over time, because we do know that the global consumer doesn't exist, and this allows us actually to give you regional and also local granularity. That brings me to the last slide of my presentation. Where you can see again our 8 footsteps in a changing context. And giving the previous slides, I give now the floor to Andrea, who will deep dive with you into the local results for Romania, focusing on our European results and on what is really hot and happening in Romania. And I will be here for questions after her part. Voilà.
Thank you very much, Nanno.